independent media, its two founders were colluding with Russian interests that were paying Tim Pool $100,000 a video for one video a week. That's an absurd amount of money. They immediately came out, and it looks like from the indictment, they had no idea the money was coming from Russia. But that's the problem. Somebody walked up to you with an $100,000 a week check, way more than you get paid for anything else that you do. And you didn't go, huh?
Johnny, tell me about what happened with Tim Pool.
Oh boy. So I just earlier told you all the greatness about independent media and why it's better than corporate media, and then it turns out independent media is just as corrupt. Let me explain. Not all of independent media, but I think there is more of this going on than we want. So first we have to remember back to when there was issues during the 2016 election. There was an argument that Russia was meddling in our election. You probably heard that. You probably thought, that's bullshit. The Mueller report said no collusion. That was the story that got told to everybody. But if you had actually read the Mueller report and you learned some things, you would find out that they absolutely were meddling in our elections. It's just there was no direct connection to Donald Trump specifically being involved with them. But they have definitely been trying to meddle in our elections. Flash forward to now, and YouTube is slowly becoming the number one way people can consume media content. It's overtaking corporate media at a crazy rate. That also attracts the same kind of nefarious interests. And you have to remember that, is there are people who want to pay for and buy that off. If you do go watch the Daily Wire, like I talked about, it's obnoxious because every 3 minutes there's an ad read. They cannot wait to jam those ad reads into every single commercial. And speaking of that, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Big Maple Syrup. Just kidding. They are doing this. So again, the whole point of independent media is it's supposed to be free of those advertising dollar incentives. And look, if you have a YouTube channel that just gets the AdSense ads, and if you don't know this and you're watching this, that's basically the default ads that YouTube just runs. If your channel gets big enough, you'll get a little bit of a trickle of money from that. It's really not at nearly as much as you might think, right? But if your videos get big enough, whatever, you get an ad share of the revenue that Google is getting from their default advertisers. Google's general advertisers, it's pretty vanilla stuff. It's products, it's services, it's stuff that's not a big deal. Now, most of the YouTube channels I watch that have something to do with gaming, for some reason, all advertise VPNs. I don't know why VPNs are sponsoring ad content. If you go watch Daily Wire, notice who's advertising on there. It's very specific companies that are like, interestingly, kind of things that would maybe favor more of a Republican audience. So that's the first thing that tips you off. It's like Black Rifle Coffee Company and gold stocks and like stuff that would appeal to people who are a little bit more skeptical of the establishment. And they like things that are like more towards the right-wing values. Okay.
Right.
So the first thing you need to understand about this story is that there is big money out there for this. That's like way, 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 way more than what the YouTube default ads will ever pay you. That's why these YouTubers take the sponsorships. They literally make more money off of those sponsorships. There's big money in the sponsorships. When you're talking about the video game guys, not very much. Like, they talk about this. One of them I watch is Bellular Gaming. He does Warcraft videos. Not only does he do ad reads, which is obnoxious, he also gets the default ads, and he has a Patreon. And it gets annoying, because I like his content, but it's like, man, dude, I got to get through 3 layers of you trying to pay your bills just to hear your shit. You know? So he advertises like 3 of those. And is that any different than trying to watch corporate media at that point? I would argue no. At that point, you're no better than the TV channel where you get a 3-minute segment of the thing you actually care about and then commercials. So all of this builds to Tim Pool, who is somewhere in the top 8, top 10 most popular right-wing commentators in the YouTube space, as well as a few others like Dave Rubin, who is more popular than he should be, but he's not quite on the Tim Pool level, right? And there were a few other, I can't remember their names. The Department of Justice creates a case or builds a case over time that this new company, Tenet Media, its two founders were colluding with Russian interests that were paying them over the course of the existence of Tenet Media, which has only been since 2022, something like $100 million. Wow. For YouTube content being produced across these channels. Or maybe it might be 10, not 100. But the point is compared to what the average bigger YouTuber makes, it's like an absurd amount of money. Even if it's 10 million, that's crazy. These guys could never make that on their own. When it came to Tim Pool, it was $100,000 a video for one video a week. That's an absurd amount of money. If you look at the Department of Justice indictment, it was obvious it's dead to rights. They're going to pay for this legally. And you could immediately tell because all of the commentators who were getting money from Tenet Media, unwittingly, they didn't know they were getting paid by the Russians. It's interesting that their narrative was conveniently what the Russians preferred. You know, right? The Russians weren't paying for David Pakman. They weren't paying for Kyle Kalinske. They were paying for Tim Pool and for Dave Rubin. That tells you a lot. Why is it these guys they were getting paid for that happen to be some of the most pro-Trump people on YouTube? Now, they immediately came out, and it looks like from the indictment they had no idea the money was coming from Russia. But that's the problem. Somebody walked up to you with an $100,000 a week check, way more than you get paid for anything else that you do. And you didn't go, huh? Why? Why do you suddenly just want to pay me all this money? They just took it. And the reason why the Russians specifically looked for these people is because they were already swaying in their direction. Both of those two channels in particular, if you go watch them, you don't have to take my word for it, but I will tell you, I've done the research, okay? They are shockingly anti-Ukrainian aid. Something that the entire rest of the West has already agreed upon. Every single country in the West, every single NATO country, we're all trying to help Ukraine out because there's an unjust war between Russia and Ukraine. But these two right-wing YouTubers we should stop giving money to Ukraine. Wonder why Russia would be interested in that. Now, if you're like, okay, was it two random Russians? No. It was two members of Russia Today. Russia Today is the propaganda state-run media arm of the Russian government. So this is directly tied to the Kremlin. This isn't just two random Russians that want to fuck up American politics. This is specifically a massively powerful, paid for and ran by the Kremlin Russian media outlet, paying for a narrative and trying to boost it. So
now you say the indictment came out that they said they didn't know it was from Russian, but last time I looked into this with you, there's no way they couldn't have known. In fact, we have text messages or emails coming from...
So that's true for the founders, just to be clear. That's true for the founders of Tenet Media. They knew they were colluding with Russia. The YouTubers that they duped, like Tim Pool, right? They didn't know.
Is this like what Tim Pool says, or is this what prosecutors also agree?
This is in the case. Now, again, if somebody's offering me $100,000 for a week, I'm going to ask where the money's coming from. Nobody's just going to suddenly offer me that amount of money without me being curious as to why or what I'm getting in return for it. Now, again, if you're in the party of, I want to not incriminate Tim Pool about this because, look, he didn't know. That's what he said on his YouTube. I'll give you the fact of why that's not really the case. Also in the indictment, these two Russian nationals, part of Russia Today, created fake aliases in a Discord that was shared between all of the Tenet Media shows. And those fake aliases were giving instructions in there to the producers of all these shows of what content to put on their channels. And they were agreeing to it. They have evidence they said, hey, cover this, talk about this, do that. And then immediately, turns out next day, that's what's getting covered on these channels.
I mean, I assume they would be giving instructions to do pro-Russia content. Like,
yep.
Don't say this about Ukraine. Try to say something about this about Ukraine, you know.
Do you remember the Tucker Carlson going to the Russian grocery store?
No.
You didn't never see that?
No.
Oh my
What is
God,
this?
dude. You as a fan of comedy, you would appreciate it. Okay? Because it's so obviously like propaganda for Russia, it's embarrassing. It's the cringiest video you'll ever watch. It's basically Tucker Carlson just walking around a Russian grocery store and being like, look how much nicer their grocery store is than ours. And then there's this one part where he like picks up a loaf of bread and he's like, oh, that's so good. Oh, like
Oh my God.
Jon Stewart had the best joke on that where he's like, ugh, I hate to see what would happen if he came across a bagel.
Oh my God. That's funny.
Oh, dude, it's wild. And so there's this conversation that the indictment has a record of between these two Russian guys and the other ones where the producers of the shows were like, that's too cringy. We don't want to cover it. And they're like, no, this is good. It's going big. You guys got to cover it. This is a huge story.
You know,
And then they covered it.
right in the same note, in a lot of the right-wing spaces on the internet where lots of like stuff like that gets circulated around, there's this Twitter channel called End Wokeness, and it will constantly, are you familiar with that channel?
I am.
You are? Okay. And it's constantly posting like right-wing, like dunking on liberals, Chad memes, that type of stuff where it's it's been here for a while. Pretty good following. I see its tweets on other platforms all the time. Mm-hmm. And there's a YouTube video came out how some guy did a deep dive on them, investigated them, and it turns out they're just like a Russian plant. They're literally just Russian plants like fueling our media with polarizing info. And we just saw that with Tim Pool. Go ahead.
The vast majority of that is on Twitter. Like
I
Russia
see.
has pumped tons of money into Twitter, which again, if you're an Elon Musk stan, all of this went on, and then he looked at all that and said, I want to buy it, and has never really addressed it. In fact, he's removed the restrictions that Twitter was trying to do to get rid of the bots. He's made it easier to bot X, not less. Facts.
Interesting. And we've seen that with Tim Pool too, or obvious Russian hack at that point. So I guess I'd ask this, Joni, if Russia's plan is to divide America, and well, I'm assuming this is true, that Russia's plan is to divide America and make us more and more polarized, you know, and destabilize our nation. Why don't they do this stuff on the left too? Or have they? Or have we found them out to be that?
So far, no. So far, no. In some cases, not necessarily directly to Russia. Now, we do know that there are foreign media companies. And so, okay, let me clarify. When I say so far, no, I mean we don't have any current proof of them paying large sums of money to specific hosts that tend to favor a side. Now, they do have tons of bot accounts that seem to be just political shit starters. They have those on the left and the right. Because, again, division is good. We just don't have evidence yet of them funding a left-wing one.